Inflation grew at its slowest pace in more than 3 years in July, boosting expectations of another interest rate cut from the Bank of Canada. StatsCan reporting the Consumer Price Index rose 2.5% last month on a year-over-year basis. That was the slowest pace since March of 2021 and was down from 2.7 in June. Lower prices for travel, tours, passenger vehicles, and electricity helped drive the figures down. I want to bring in BNN Bloomberg's Paul Bagnell now with more. Paul, what's your key takeaway from these inflation numbers this morning?
Well, I think there's a couple, Marcia. One is that the trend of lower inflation is very, very clear now. There's no question. And price inflation in the Canadian economy is solidly on its way down. As you've said, it's the 7th consecutive month that headline inflation, the pace of headline inflation, has declined in Canada. And if you calculate a 3-month moving average, which a lot of economists consider a more reliable way of measuring the trend, that 3-month moving average is declining as well. So just to be clear, prices are still increasing, but they are increasing at a more modest pace, and they're getting very close now to the Bank of Canada's target of 2.0%, and they're well within the rate of inflation is well within its target range, which is between 2 and 3%. The other takeaway is this clearly sets up the Bank of Canada to cut its benchmark interest rate for a third time, this time on September the 4th. The bank made it very clear the last time it spoke to Canadians on a rate announcement day that it's becoming concerned about economic weakness. One reason inflation is coming down is that the economy is slowing, economic growth is slowing, and the bank feels that it's time to support economic growth with lower interest rates. Lower interest rates make money more available, they make it easier to borrow, they make it easier for businesses to expand, and so on. So a Bank of Canada rate cut on September the 4th is widely expected, and most economists also expect rate cuts, Marcia, in October and in December as well.
Okay. Switching gears, and while we have you, the clock is ticking down to avert a rail strike or a lockout. What is the latest this morning, and what are you learning at BNN as to how devastating this could be to the Canadian economy, Paul?
Well, it would be, of course, unprecedented to have both rail systems, CN and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, down at the same time. Business groups are extremely concerned about the effect on the economy. I had late last week, I spoke with a senior official at the Chemistry Association of Canada. It's a group that represents chemical manufacturers and processors. And one point that gentleman made was that municipalities around Canada use chlorine to purify their drinking water. We know that, but what a lot of people don't realize is municipalities, because of the volatile and dangerous nature of chlorine, they don't maintain large stockpiles. They maintain a couple of weeks of inventory, and they get their chlorine through the rail system. And if the rail system goes down for any prolonged period of time, there's a real question about the ability of municipalities to get the chlorine they need to purify drinking water. And I'm sure that you would find similar cases elsewhere in the Canadian economy. The supply chains are extremely important in this country. When there was a rail blockade a few years ago, a protest that blocked one of the rail lines for a large period of time, there was a big issue about propane making its way into Quebec. It's used, for instance, by hospitals for backup generators. And the same thing there. Huge inventories of propane are not maintained. The users of that product depend on the rail system for their products to get there. So that's a rambling explanation, but there's a lot of pressure, I think, on the union and on management to come to a deal. The most recent signal from the federal government is that it's not willing yet to step in.
Paul, thank you for all that. Really